As our ranking member just pointed out, this is our first markup of the session, and I will begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. So in today's world, unfortunately, too many Americans are skeptical that government does much of any good for them. But that's not true of today, and it's not true here. It's really humbling to chair the subcommittee as we mark up 6 bipartisan bills that will actually save lives. Think about it for a moment. Our committee is going to be ensuring that no more children, we hope no more, die from dressers that tip over and crush them. No more babies will suffer from suffocation from crib bumpers. No more people are burnt from unsafe fuel containers. Families are safe from carbon monoxide poisoning in their homes, and firefighters are safe from chemicals that can actually exacerbate fires. This is the stuff of everyday life. And I am proud to be the lead sponsor of 2 of those bills and co-sponsor of all 6. I want to thank my colleagues on both sides of the aisle for their leadership on these important pieces of legislation. I also want to say a special thank you to all the staff on both sides of the aisle for the good work that they have done and that we have all done together. Mike Thompson and David Joyce, a Democrat and Republican who do not serve on this committee, introduced the Portable Fuel Safety Container Safety Act, which would direct the Consumer Product Safety Commission to establish a mandatory standard for flame mitigation devices in portable fuel containers. The first bill we will be marking up is the Sturdy Act, which would direct the CPSC to enact a mandatory standard to prevent furniture tip-overs. Every hour of every day, common pieces of furniture like clothing storage units, dressers, and chests tip, tilt, and fall. According to the CPSC, tip-overs inflict around 3 injuries per hour and cause, unfortunately, hundreds of avoidable child fatalities. Product experts and parental groups agree that tip-over injuries are preventable, but current industry standards are simply not enough. In 2018 alone, over 2 million units of children's products faced recall, and nursery furniture was among the leading category. CPSC rulemaking can't move fast enough. And in the last 10 years, the CPSC finalized only 1 mandatory safety standard. So I'm so appreciative of Ranking Member Kathy Rogers for her commitment to working with me on this legislation. The second bill was introduced last month with my friend from Chicago, Bobby Rush, and Robin Kelly, is the Safe Cribs Act, which would ban crib bumpers. The American Academy of Pediatrics safe sleep recommendations call for infants to sleep on a firm, flat surface and does not recommend the use of crib bumpers due to the risk of suffocation. CPSC, for its part, has been working on safety standards for crib bumpers since 2012. But it is not clear when, if ever, they will adopt a standard, and families need this legislation now. And finally, I want to take a moment to make a note about to make note of H.R. 3163, the FASTER Act, which is designed and aiming at speeding up recall products, which I think is clearly needed. But I do want to say that this bill is not being marked up this morning, but was included in the legislation that we heard last month. We have been working in a bipartisan, good faith discussions on the bills that are under consideration today, and will continue to do so, including working on H.R. 3169, the FASTER Act. We are working to ensure that the Fast Track recall program does not lose support, to ensure that consumers get recall information and as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And I want to assure my ranking member that I am absolutely committed to continuing to work together with her and all members of the committee on both sides of the aisle so that this issue can move forward and will move forward. And so the chair now recognizes Ms. Rogers, ranking member for the Subcommittee on Consumer Protection and Commerce, for 5 minutes for her opening statement.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and to all my colleagues on the committee. I am pleased to be here today and want to thank the chair and all the members and the staff too for working and addressing many of the concerns that were raised on our side of the aisle so that we could move forward in a with bipartisan support today. I also appreciate the stated commitment to continuing to work on my bill, the FASTER Act. I was disappointed that it wasn't included in today's markup. We've made progress on building a bipartisan consensus, and though I think today is a missed opportunity, I appreciate the commitment of the chair and the committee to keep working on this legislation. I encourage consumer groups, industry experts, and others to provide your feedback and engage with me in the committee. We must work on the FASTER Act because consumer safety and people's lives are on the line. The Consumer Protection Safety Commission's Fast Track Recall program is too slow. Yes, there was a time when it worked consistently. There was a time when it was award-winning, but that's not the case anymore. Like many things in Washington, D.C., Fast Track has become slow because of an outdated bureaucracy. It's a program from 1995 that isn't functioning in the 21st century economy. It's time to speed the recall process up again. Thank you especially to Representative Soto for working with me to do just that. Turning to the 6 bills before us today, beginning with H.R. 2211, the Sturdy Act. Thank you, Chairwoman, for listening to our feedback. I'm encouraged by the improvements that have been made on the bill, and I hope that our work will continue as we get closer to a full committee markup. H.R. 3172, the Safe Sleep Act, addressing a suffocating hazard related to recent recalls of several inclined sleep products. Losing a baby is an unimaginable tragedy, and I hope that our efforts here today and the work that's already been done by the CPSC can help prevent these tragic deaths from happening in the future. I encourage parents to visit saferproducts.gov to get the most up-to-date information about these recalls. H.R. 3170, the Safe Cribs Act of 2019, will address the suffocation hazard created by padded crib bumpers. During the legislative hearing a few weeks ago, we presented data on why mesh bumpers were safe alternatives that would also prevent kids' arms and legs from getting trapped in cribs. I appreciate that the majority took this into account so that we can consider my amendment that models what states are doing. This amendment will ensure parents can access safe mesh bumpers and won't turn to putting pillows and blankets back in the cribs, which also pose suffocation risk like padded bumpers. I'd like to thank Mr. Carter and Mr. Upton for their work on H.R. 1618, the Nicholas and Zachary Burt Barden Monoxide Poisoning Prevention Act of 2019. Carbon monoxide detectors save lives. Just earlier this year, a detector saved a Spokane Valley's man's life in my district, alerting him to a significant carbon monoxide leak in his home, just 11 days after he had put it in. I look forward to continuing to work with you on this legislation to help get safe carbon monoxide detectors into more homes. Turning to H.R. 806, the Portable Fuel Container Safety Act of 2019. This bill requires all consumer fuel container products utilize a flame mitigation device, preventing dangerous flame jetting from occurring. Too many fuel containers with no mitigation devices have caused severe burns and even death. These tragedies are preventable. Thank you, Margaret Lewis, for turning your family's tragedy into a personal mission to prevent other families from having to live through a similar nightmare. Your steadfast commitment to your family in this issue got us to this point. And while Mr. Griffith isn't on the subcommittee, I'd like to recognize his work on H.R. 2647, the Safer Occupancy Furniture Flammability Act, or SOFA. I share the goals of this legislation, but have concerns with the current draft that sets a state technical bulletin as a federal standard. We should have one set of standards for furniture flammability, especially today when there's an increased risk of fires across the country and in my district. So thank you, everyone, for being a part of this markup today. I understand that we will be voice voting the bills, and with that, I will yield back.
I thank the ranking member for yielding back. Some of what you said reminded me that while I thanked the members and the staff, I didn't thank the advocates, and particularly we have heard from people whose children have actually died, who have come here so bravely to testify on behalf of some of this legislation. So thank you for that. And now I recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Today we are considering 6 bills that will keep kids and consumers safe from dangerous products as part of this committee's commitment to put consumers first. Madam Chair, I just wanted to say, you know, a lot of people say that consumerism is dead and that, you know, the public or the media don't pay attention to it and the Congress doesn't pay attention to it. But I want to commend you because from the very beginning when you decided to chair this subcommittee, you said that we were going to put consumers first and that consumerism isn't dead and that we need to do whatever we can to protect consumers, and this is really part of that. And the other thing, too, is, you know, I always hear people say, well, you know, politicians don't care about kids because kids don't vote. And the reality is that you care, and this committee cares on a bipartisan basis about kids and putting kids and consumers first. So I just wanted to say that by way of opening. Congressional action is needed given the failure of the Consumer Product Safety Commission to act in recent years. At recent hearings, we heard from parents, consumer advocates, and even some commissioners that CPSC is too slow to act, too timid, or too deferential to industry, and its inaction has resulted in unnecessary injuries and at times cost Americans their lives. At our legislative hearing last month, we heard emotional testimony from Crystal Ellis, whose son Camden was killed when a dresser tipped over onto him. She put a human face on the thousands of injured kids and more than 200 killed by furniture tip-overs. Ms. Ellis told us about the lack of action by industry to develop a voluntary standard to reduce or eliminate furniture tip-overs. And Chair Schakowsky's Sturdy Act would require CPSC to adopt a strong mandatory standard within 1 year of enactment, and I commend her for her leadership on this legislation. We're also considering 2 bills today to reduce infant deaths and promote safe sleep practices. Representative Cardenas' Safe Sleep Act would ban dangerous inclined sleepers that are responsible for at least 50 deaths. Some of these sleepers have been recalled, but others are still in stores and online, where soon-to-be parents or grandparents or well-meaning friends may purchase them. Crib bumpers are another hazardous children's product that is still being sold, despite pediatricians urging parents not to use them. For years, pediatricians and public health experts have recommended against using crib bumpers because they can cause suffocation, strangulation, entrapment, entanglement, or falls. And they also provide no benefit to the baby. Several cities and states have already banned crib bumpers, including Chicago, Ohio, and Maryland, but that's not enough. It's time for Congress to act to make sure that babies are safe from these products no matter where they live. And we're also considering 3 bills that have long had bipartisan support. Representatives Custer and Carter introduced the Nicholas and Zachary Burton Carbon Monoxide Poisoning Prevention Act. This bill would direct CPSC to establish a grant program for states and local governments to install carbon monoxide alarms in dwellings, childcare facilities, schools, and senior centers, and to assist with education and enforcement efforts to keep Americans safe from this silent killer. Representatives Thompson and Joyce introduced the Portable Fuel Container Safety Act, which is also co-sponsored by numerous Democrats and Republicans, and this legislation would require CPSC to adopt a mandatory rule to prevent flame jetting in portable fuel containers and improve child resistance controls on kerosene and diesel fuel containers. And finally, Representatives Matsui and Griffith introduced the Safer Occupancy Furniture Flammability Act, which would adopt California's furniture flammability standard for upholstered furniture as a national flammability standard. California's standard can be met without the use of toxic flame retardant chemicals that endanger not only the families that have these chemicals in their household furniture, but also firefighters who are exposed to them when battling fires. As we heard from Captain Chris Parsons at our hearing last month, these chemicals have caused severe health problems for firefighters, and I commend Representatives Matsui and Griffith for their leadership on this issue. So, and all 60 of these bills will save American lives, and particularly kids, and that's why I'm pleased to support them and appreciate all your work, Chairman Schakowsky, and the fact that this is bipartisan. I yield back.
I thank you, Chairman Pallone, and now I recognize Mr. Walden, the ranking member of the full committee, for 5 minutes.
I'm glad with all these bandages, you still recognize me, Madam Chair.
Really?
Thank you. I'm fine. It was just always wear sunscreen. Good morning. Welcome to the first Consumer Protection and Commerce Subcommittee Markup of the year. And today we, as we've heard, will consider these 6 really important bills. I know there's been a lot of discussion about them. I know some of them are more ready for prime time than others, but I know we're all working together in a good bipartisan spirit to get them perfected by the full committee. As I know you've made the commitment, Madam Chair, on the FASTER Act, we look forward to getting that in a good place as well, and we appreciate the majority continue to work with us on all of these. And I know there's still some issues, but I want to thank Ms. Rogers for her leadership in this area, because this was once an award-winning fast-track recall program, but it has slowed to a crawl, and we need to fix it. So the FASTER Act includes provisions of the existing Consumer Product Safety Commission program. It takes lessons learned from the recall processes at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the FDA. And I think it's a real common sense bill. It puts consumers first and bureaucracy second. I also want to thank our subcommittee Republican leader, Ms. Rogers, for her leadership on this importance of maintaining the fast-track recall program, as well as Mr. Soto for his support of this legislation as well. Protecting consumers, I know, is a real passion of yours, and it's something that's shared in a bipartisan way to take care of our most vulnerable, our kids in society especially. So we appreciate that. And then, of course, H.R. 806, the Portable Fuel Container Safety Act of 2019. This really will prevent injuries and deaths from flame jetting. H.R. 806 requires the use of mitigation devices. These will drastically improve safety around the use of portable fuel containers. And as you've already heard, and will hear throughout the markup, concerns remain about some of the other bills we'll consider today. But in the spirit of bipartisanship, we intend to work with you to voice vote these out of the subcommittee, continue them on their legislative journey, and negotiate the final language before the full committee markup. My hope is we can keep this process bipartisan and resolve our concerns. And so, Chair Schakowsky, thank you for your leadership on these issues and for your continuing commitment to work with us to find bipartisan solutions. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
I want to thank the ranking member of the full committee. And now, are there any other members who seek recognition? And that would be for 3 minutes. Okay. Seeing none, I believe that concludes our opening statements, and pursuant to committee rules, members' written opening statements shall be made part of the record. Please submit written opening statements to the clerk's desk. So at this time, we will begin the bill consideration. The chair calls up H.R. 2211, the Stop Tip-Overs of Unstable Risky Dressers on Youth Act, the Sturdy Act, and the clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2211, a bill to require the Consumer Product Safety Commission to promulgate a consumer product safety rule for freestanding
Without
clothing.
objection, the first reading of the bill will be dispensed with. The bill is now considered as read. Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I will now recognize myself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute introduced by me and Ranking Member Rogers. My amendment is labeled SLW 226, SLW 26. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in nature of a substitute to H.R. 2211 offered by Ms. Schakowsky of Illinois. Strike out all after the
Without objection, the reading of the amendment will be dispensed with, and I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. As I said, the Sturdy Act fills a critical need. Despite scores of injuries and deaths from falling furniture, the voluntary standards remain insufficient. It's unacceptable and it's obvious that we need to take action. This amendment is a product of careful negotiations to clarify the language and clearly define the role of the Consumer Product Safety Commission in addressing these dangers. I want to thank Ranking Member Rogers for working so closely with me over the past few weeks, and thank the staffs as well to move this bill forward with bipartisan support. It's simple. This bill will save lives, and I hope my colleagues will join me in supporting the Sturdy Act.
Madam Chair.
Yes, let me recognize the ranking member.
I move to strike
Yes,
the
I'm
last
yielding.
word. Okay.
Yes.
This morning, I joined Chair Schakowsky offering this amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2211, the Sturdy Act. It is absolutely important to protect children from tip-over-related injuries and deaths. However, as I made clear throughout this process, I want to ensure we are narrowly focused on the tip-over hazard and address it in the most effective manner possible without unnecessarily putting jobs and small businesses at risk. This substitute amendment is an improvement, but there's still some more work to be done. I encourage interested parties to give us feedback as we continue our work on this important topic. I'm generally not a big proponent of delegating rulemaking to agencies, but we do have an obligation to protect our most vulnerable. For that reason, I will continue to work with you before the full committee markup to see if we can address some of the concerns that have been raised. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, and I assure you that we will be working with you. And are there other members seeking recognition to speak on the amendment?
Madam Chair.
For what purpose does Mr. Latta seek recognition?
Thank you very much. Strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I truly appreciate the work that you and the subcommittee have done to address the safety of our children from the possibility of furniture tip-overs. I believe that there should be a safety standard to guide manufacturers as they seek to improve furniture stability. That is why I support making the current voluntary standard mandatory so that the CPSC will have more enforcement tools to go after bad actors. The CPSC is currently working through the rulemaking process to allow them to do this. I do have concerns with how H.R. 2211 is currently drafted because of the new standards it implements that will significantly impact the engineering and testing of units for furniture manufacturers that are making safe products. Mandating the current voluntary standards coupled with strong enforcement will be an effective approach to ensure that these pieces of furniture are safe. It is my hope that as this bill moves through the full committee, the majority will continue to work with us to address these concerns, that we can focus on what matters most, protecting our children from harm by providing workable solutions. And with that, Madam Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Lett. Are there other members seeking recognition to speak on the amendment? Okay. Seeing none. Okay. Are there any members who seek recognition to offer an amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? Okay. Seeing none. If there is no, debate. Okay, is there, if there is no further debate, we will, is there anybody? We will proceed to a vote on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment, okay, the amendment is agreed to. I'm sorry, did I miss something? Okay. Okay. Being my first markup, I'm sorry, what are you saying?
So we've already done that, so now we're moving to,
Okay, the amendment then, in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2211, is agreed to. The question is now on forwarding H.R. 2211 as amended to the full committee. All those in favor of forwarding H.R. 2211 as amended to the full committee will signify by saying aye. All those opposed, nay. And in the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and and H.R. 2211 as amended is favorably forwarded to the full committee. Okay. The chair now calls up H.R. 3172, the Safe Sleep Act. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 3172, a bill to prohibit the manufacture, for sale, offer for sale, distribution in commerce, or importation in the United States of any inclined sleeper for infants and for other purposes.
So without objection, the first reading of the bill will be dispensed, well, actually, we didn't dispense with it, we heard it. And the bill is now considered as read. Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. So I recognize myself then for 5 minutes to strike the last word. I'm proud to speak in support of Congressman Cardenis's bill, the Safe Sleep for Babies Act, which will finally ban inclined sleepers. These products have been the source of all kinds of confusion for consumers. More often than not, parents and other caregivers are unaware that children have died while using the many versions of these products. There have been many recalls of these products over the years, but just recently, in the face of dozens of deaths from the rock and play, it took our hearing on this bill to get the CPSC to recall that product. But the rock and play and the other inclined sleepers that are still on the market should never have been sold in the first place. There has been so much evidence that these products are dangerous, but that evidence, unfortunately, was ignored. We cannot ignore these deaths, and we cannot allow the CPSC to continue to ignore the problem. So, Congressman Cardenas, I want to say a special thank you to him for introducing this bill, and I urge my colleagues to support this bill and save lives. So are there other members seeking recognition to offer a bipartisan amendment?
Madam Chair,
Yes, for what purpose? Does the chairman seek recognition?
I'd like to offer an amendment on behalf of Mr. Cardenas that basically changes the name of the act.
Okay, what is your amendment, what is his amendment labeled?
It looks like it's just Amendment 1, OBJY 01.
Well, the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 3172, offered by Mr. Pallone on behalf of Mr. Cardenas. Page 2, begin on line 4, strike safe sleep
Without
act.
objection, the reading of the amendment will be dispensed with. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Basically, what the amendment does is just change the name of the bill. As you can see, strike Safe Sleep Act of 2009 and insert Safe Sleep Act for Babies Act of 2019.
Oh, okay. Mr. Pallone yields back. Are there other members seeking recognition to speak on the amendment? Okay. Okay, if there is no further debate, we will proceed to a vote on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment will signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. So in the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Are there any further amendments to this legislation? Okay. So the question now occurs on favorably forwarding H.R. Did we vote on the full bill? Okay. The question now occurs on favorably forwarding H.R. 3172 to the full committee. All those in favor of forwarding H.R. 3172 to the full committee will signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. And in the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the legislation will be forwarded. H.R. 3172 is forwarded to the full committee. Okay, moving along. The chair calls up H.R. 3170, the Safe Crib Act of 2019. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 3170, a bill to prohibit the manufacture, for sale, offer for sale, distribution.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill will be dispensed with. The bill is now will now be considered as read. Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment at any point.
Madam Chair, I have a bipartisan amendment at the desk. It's titled Bumper 01.
We have it.
Okay. Where are we? The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 3170, offered by Mrs. Rogers of Washington. Page 2, line 16, strike and insert a semicolon. Page 2, beginning on line 18.
Without
strike.
objection, the reading of the amendment will be dispensed with. The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I offer this bipartisan amendment to H.R. 3170, the Safe Cribs Act, to ensure that we are focused on addressing the specific suffocation risk padded crib bumpers present. I agree with the goal of the bill, to protect infants from suffocation risk associated with crib bumpers. However, as introduced, 3170 banned all crib bumpers, including safe mesh liners. There's no evidence that non-padded mesh liners pose a suffocation risk to infants. In fact, banning mesh liners would have actually increased the risk of injury to infants. While new crib standards prevent infants from being able to get their heads stuck, there's still a risk of them trapping their arms and legs. We have the data clearly showing this is a hazard. There are hundreds of instances of hospital trips for infants with dislocated or broken limbs that got stuck in between the crib slats. This has been recognized by every state or locality that has banned the sale of crib bumpers. Each has included an exception for mesh liners like this amendment. We must make sure that parents have safe tools to protect their families, not only from suffocation hazards, but also from limb injuries. This bipartisan amendment exempts non-padded mesh crib liners from the ban in H.R. 3170. I'd like to thank the majority and the bipartisan co-sponsors for joining me in crafting this amendment based on real-world data. This is a common sense amendment, and I strongly urge all of my colleagues to support it. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank our ranking member, and are there other members seeking recognition to speak on the amendment? Okay. If there is no further debate, we'll proceed to vote on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment will signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Are there further amendments to this legislation? Okay, if not, then I recognize myself for 5 minutes to strike the last word on the underlying bill. For years, pediatricians have given very clear recommendations for keeping babies safe while they sleep. Bare is best. Nothing should be in the crib with your baby. Blankets, pillows, and crib bumpers in the crib create unnecessary danger of suffocation. The CPSC has known about this problem for a long time, but it has put out warning statements noting that the dozens of infant deaths caused every year from soft bedding in the crib. 4 commissioners even released a joint statement urging parents not to use padded crib bumpers, but despite numerous deaths, yet again, CPSC stopped short. Parents believe they are doing the best that they can for their children. They believe that the products on the store shelves must be safe, or they wouldn't be allowed to be sold. We can no longer sit by and let that confusion continue. The Safe Crib Act will finally take the step that the CPSC has failed to do and ban crib bumpers. As with the other bills before us, this bill will save lives, and I encourage my colleagues to vote yes. So the question is now on forwarding H.R. 3170 as amended to the full committee. All those in favor of forwarding H.R. 3170 to the full committee will signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed will signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Excuse me. H.R. 3170, as amended, is favorably reported to the full committee. Okay. So the chair will now call up H.R. 1618, the Nicholas and Zachary Burt Carbon Monoxide Poisoning Prevention Act of 2019. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1618, a bill to encourage states to require the installation of residential carbon
Without
monoxide
objection, the
detectors in
first
homes
reading
and for
of the
other
bill will be dispensed with. The bill is now considered as read. Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendments at any point. I will now recognize myself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute. The amendment is labeled SLW 29. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1618 offered by Ms. Schakowsky. Strike all after the enacting clause and insert the
Without
following.
objection, the reading of the amendment will be dispensed with. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. This bill takes an important step to curb carbon monoxide poisoning, and I support this bill. I am offering a small amendment to remove an unnecessary provision related to the funding of an unrelated agency. It in no way limits or weakens the bill. I support advancing this bill forward to the full committee and to the floor, and to encourage my colleagues to do so as well. And I yield back. And are there others who wish to
Madam Chair.
speak on the amendment?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Carter is recognized.
Madam Chair, I move to strike the last word. Madam Chair, it's no surprise that carbon monoxide poisoning is something that can impact all Americans regardless of where you live. However, we have seen in Georgia the effects of carbon monoxide poisoning on people. In early January, the Savannah Fire Department responded to a home where a mother and her children were experiencing the symptoms of carbon monoxide poisoning. It occurs much more frequently than many of us realize. According to the CDC, 50,000 people a year in the United States experience carbon monoxide poisoning. Of those, at least 430 people die from accidental carbon monoxide poisoning. That's why I joined my friend, Ms. Custer, in introducing H.R. 1618, the Nicholas and Zachary Burt Carbon Monoxide Poisoning Prevention Act, in March. This legislation would establish a grant program for states to help assist them in carrying out CO poisoning prevention actions. Those grants can be used for everything from installing alarms in the units of elderly individuals to training officials in the installation of such alarms. While I'm happy to see this legislation sponsored by my good friend move through committee, I was disappointed to learn that the pay-for included in the underlying legislation would be struck under this amendment. I believe it is good fiscal practice to ensure we can fund these very programs we're here to help stand up. While this legislation can still be funded through discretionary appropriations, I hope that we can continue to work together in a fashion that will ensure that these programs can be a benefit to the people who need it the most, the American public. I look forward to working with my colleagues to improve safety and provide the tools and resources needed to combat this horrible statistic. Carbon monoxide poisoning is a terrible occurrence, and working together to lower injuries and especially deaths is a step in the right direction. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. And are there other members seeking recognition to speak on the amendment? Okay. So where am I? Okay. Once again, are there any members who seek recognition to offer an amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? Okay, seeing none, if there's no further discussion or any further amendment, we will proceed to vote on the amendment in the nature of a substitute that I introduced. All those in favor of the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1618 will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1618 is agreed to. The question now occurs on forwarding H.R. 1618 as amended to the full committee. All those in favor of forwarding H.R. 1618 as amended to the full committee will signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. And, there we go. H.R. 1618 as amended is favorably forwarded to the full committee. Okay. All right, moving on. The chair now calls up H.R. 806, the Portable Fuel Container Safety Act of 2019, and the clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 806, a bill to require compliant flame mitigation devices to be used on portable fuel containers for flammable in liquid fuels and for other purposes.
Without that is the full? Okay. Then the first reading of the bill is complete, and without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment at any point.
Madam Chair,
I now recognize Mr. Latta.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I have an amendment at the desk in the nature of a substitute.
Mr. Latta, what is your amendment labeled?
I believe the last four digits are 0027.xml.
Okay. I also have SLW27, but okay. So the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute, H.R. 806, offered by Mr. Latta. Strike all after the enacting clause and insert.
Without
the following.
objection, the reading of the amendment will be dispensed with. Mr. Latta is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And my amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 806 would make technical corrections based off of the assistance provided by the Consumer Product Safety Commission. This legislation, originally introduced by the gentleman from California, Mr. Thompson, would direct the CPSC to issue a consumer product safety rule to require flame mitigation devices and portable fuel containers in an effort to prevent terrible accidents caused by jet flaming. If it is determined that there are voluntary standards that would prevent the propagation of flames into containers, then the CPSC would, or I should say could, adopt these standards as their rule. We have heard the heart-wrenching stories here in the subcommittee, what happens to a loved one when one of the jet flaming incidents occurs. With this legislation, it is my hope that we will educate the public and prevent these injuries from happening in the future. And I encourage my colleagues to support this amendment in the nature of a substitute and yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Latta. Are there other members seeking recognition to speak on Mr. Latta's amendment? Okay. Are there any members who seek recognition to offer an amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? The amendment, right? Okay. If there is no further discussion and no further amendments, we will proceed to a vote on the amendment in the nature of a substitute introduced by the gentleman from Arizona. That's not. Okay. All those in, sorry about.
Ohio.
It's Ohio, yeah. Sorry about that. I know that. Are all those in favor of the gentleman from Ohio's amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 806 will signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 806 is agreed to. Okay, now we move to. The question now occurs on favorably forwarding H.R. 806 as amended to the full committee. All those in favor of forwarding H.R. 806 as amended to the full committee will signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed will say nay, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. And H.R. 806, as amended, is forwarded to the full committee. Okay. And last but not least, the chair calls up H.R. 2647, the Safer Occupancy Furniture Flammability Act, or SOFA. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2647, a bill to adopt a certain California flammability standard as federal flammability standard to protect against the risk
Without
of
objection,
upholstered
the first
furniture.
reading of the bill will be dispensed with. The bill is now considered as read. Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Are there any members seeking recognition to offer a bipartisan amendment?
Madam Chair,
For what purpose does the member seek recognition?
to strike the last word.
The member may proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for including the SOFA Act that I introduced with Congressman Griffith in this markup. As many of you know, commonly used flame retardant chemicals in furniture have been found to be associated with adverse health effects, including fertility complications, certain types of cancer, heart defects, and hormone disruption. My home state of California has addressed this issue through Technical Bulletin 117 by amending the law in 2013 to reduce the need for these potentially dangerous chemicals in household furniture products, while continuing to enforce strong flammability standards that will ensure American safety. However, a lack of comprehensive action has unfortunately allowed for a patchwork of regulations across the country on flammability requirements, creating a difficult and burdensome regulatory framework for furniture manufacturers. Our bill would direct CPSC to take the California standard, which is already almost a de facto federal standard, and apply it nationally. I am pleased that Mr. Griffith and I have put forward a common sense solution that will ensure the integrity of our flammability standards, provide certainty in the market, and reduce the threat of exposure to health-harming chemicals. This bill enjoys broad support from stakeholders, including furniture companies, firefighters, and consumer protection advocates. I thank the subcommittee for including this important bill in this markup, and I do look forward to continuing to work with all interesting parties as SOFA moves through the process to ensure it will pass Congress and benefit American consumers. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentlewoman. Are there any members who seek recognition to offer an amendment?
Madam Chair, I move to strike the last word.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, as I made clear earlier, I want to move forward in a bipartisan manner if possible. I agree with the policy objectives of H.R. 2647, the SOFA Act. Providing national uniformity is critical to ensure certainty for furniture manufacturers and retailers who support jobs across the country. However, I do have concerns with how H.R. 2647 was drafted. The bill incorporates a state technical bulletin into federal statute by reference. As far as I know, this is unprecedented, codifying a standard into statute. That could have significant implications for how it would be enforced. We should also learn about more specific concerns that have been raised within the CPSC about enforcement. I believe we can move forward and provide certainty and set a national standard. That needs to be our goal. I'm committed to working with you and the rest of our colleagues on this bill moving forward and hope we can find a bipartisan solution before the bill is marked up at the full committee. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlewoman and ask if there are any members who seek recognition to offer an amendment. Okay. Therefore, the question now occurs on favorably forwarding H.R. 2647 to the full committee. All those in favor of favorably forwarding H.R. 2647 to the full committee will signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed will signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the H.R. 2647 is favorably forwarded to the full committee. That's it. I hope all of our markups are like this going forward. I'd really appreciate it. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make technical and confirming changes to the bills that we are forwarding today, consistent with the actions taken by the subcommittee. Let's see. I ask unanimous consent to enter the following statements into the record. A letter of support from Public Citizen for the Sturdy Act. Without objection, a joint statement from Child Health and Consumer Advocacy groups supporting the Safe Cribs Act. A joint statement from Child Health and Consumer Advocacy groups supporting the Safe Sleep Act. A letter of support from consumer groups for the Sturdy Act. Is that it? Without objection, and so ordered. Just that?
I think we're just adjourning.
Any comments? Okay. Thank you, everybody. And with that, the subcommittee is adjourned.
Very good.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Have a good day.